Chapter 31. The Pickup. The vast expanse of the highway sprawled before Sierra and Carlos, a ribbon of tedium broken occasionally by vehicles that zipped past. The constant hum of the road beneath the tires created a lulling white noise, the kind that makes one's thoughts wander and eyelids heavy. Sierra leaned her head against the cool window pane, her eyes capturing fleeting glimpses of the world outside. Trees blurred into streaks of green and brown, the sky painted in the soft pastels of dawn. She felt an impossible mixture of exhaustion and hyper-awareness, as if every nerve ending in her body was tingling. Beside her, Carlos had a similar distant look in his eyes. He absently drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on the horizon, but seemingly seeing far beyond it. The weight of the morning's events hung between them, a shared trauma that both were still processing. What stood out, almost jarringly, was the normalcy around them. The flow of cars, the familiar roadside billboards, and the radio announcer's voice breaking in with traffic updates, and that repetitive, almost monotonous declaration of martial law. Sierra wondered how many of those driving around them were truly aware of the situation, how many were just going about their daily routines, either ignorant or in denial of the turbulent times. Carlos turned down the radio's volume, the announcement fading into the background. "It's like a dream," he muttered, "where everything looks normal. But you know something's not right." Sierra nodded, her voice soft. "And you can't wake up from it." Sierra and Carlos grappled with the seeming obliviousness of those around them. How could the masses remain so trusting, placing blind faith in a government that seemed to have hidden agendas? They both yearned for a collective awakening, a realization that the world was not as it seemed, for now they were but two vigilant souls amid a sea of dreamers. A sudden tension gripped Carlos as a white vehicle slid into view beside them. The bold blue letters emblazoned on its door screamed a clear message: UN. His posture stiffened, every muscle tightened. He turned to Sierra, finding her already alert and mirroring his concern. "What?" she asked as she looked in the mirrors and expected to see a cop car, but there was none. "I've heard stories about it, even seen videos online, but only thought of them as conspiracy nut jobs. Now I'm not so sure," Carlos replied. "Again what?" she asked with curiosity. They were videos of trains carrying hundreds of UN vehicles throughout the country. Nobody ever said where they were going or why. It was believed that they were being staged for something. Then Carlos paused, rested his elbow on the door, and stroked his newly grown beard as if in deep thought. "Staged for what?" Sierra demanded. "For this," he replied calmly as the UN vehicle slowly passed them in the right lane. Sierra watched as the vehicle pulled ahead and thought about what the former ranger had just said. Has this all been orchestrated? She wondered. The thoughts of her family being used for this purpose made her sick, and with tears beginning to form in her eyes, she quickly shook the image from her mind and chose to focus only on the here and now before any tears had the chance of pouring from her eyes. "In about 3 miles we will see the exit," Carlos reminded her, seeing that she could use a distraction. As he spoke, Sierra's finger tripped the blinker as she began moving over to the right lane of traffic. Thinking she was just preparing, Carlos sat quietly until she began to move over onto the exit ramp. "The next exit is ours," he said while watching the UN vehicle making its way up the exit. Still, Sierra continued following the vehicle. After spending the last few months with her, Carlos knew that there was nothing more he could say, and he sat back wondering what Sierra hoped to gain. That all changed once his eyes saw where the UN vehicle was heading. He hoped Sierra wasn't going to follow. Just off the exit sat a gas station parking lot and more than a dozen white cars with blue lettering. As he looked over at Sierra, Carlos could tell that the excitement of the morning wasn't over. Carlos thought to himself, this was a very bad idea, but he calmly looked over at Sierra and asked, "You aren't pulling in there, right?" As he asked his question, he was answered by the turn signal. It was clear that she was. Readying his pistol, Carlos could see that there was going to be a fight. "We are just locals to them, Ranger boy," Sierra said. She still had somewhat of a smile on her face, and that worried him. Following right behind the UN vehicle, they pulled into the gas station. The UN men went right to meet the others, who were apparently waiting for their arrival, and Sierra went straight for the gas station, where many of the soldiers were entering. Removing her sidearm as if it were just another day, she looked at Carlos as she opened her door. "I'll be right back. You want anything?" "No, I'm good," Carlos replied, looking at her questioningly as she closed the door behind her and began walking into the store like just another girl on the block. Sitting in the truck surrounded by what he now considered the enemy made Carlos feel as if it were the end. Trying not to watch them, he could hear them talking from the distance, but he was unable to understand what they were saying. The thing he did understand was that they weren't here on vacation. Watching the gas station doors and straining to hear the conversation between the UN men, Carlos couldn't help but feel a little jealousy toward those who were still oblivious to what was taking place in the country. Carlos thought about how nice it would have been if he had only come in late for work and had never taken the phone call that changed his life. That wasn't the case, though, and he had already hit the bottom of the rabbit hole. Now, he only felt sorrow. Sorrow for the millions of lives that were going to change and be lost due to a government controlled by people out for power. Carlos's heart thumped hard and fast in his chest, and his grip tightened around his pistol as Sierra exited the gas station doors with 2 UN soldiers, one on each side. Moving for the door handle, ready to exit, Carlos took a deep breath and exhaled. He enjoyed and savored the breath as if it would be his last. As the last of the air crossed his lips, his muscles tightened, ready to make his move. Then he heard it, laughter. She's laughing. Without realizing it, hearing Sierra laugh relaxed Carlos's tense muscles and he sank back in his seat. Sierra was the only person he knew who could make a man beg for a moment of her time or fear for his life. "Dad, look what I found. Can I keep them?" she giggled. "Dad?" Carlos said under his breath. "I'm 35. Mentally shaking his head, he replied, "No, we have horses to pick up. Let's go." He raised his hand to say hi to the 2 men. "Sorry, boys, I have to run," Sierra said with a hint of sadness in her voice as she gave each of them a pouty face and began to walk backward to the driver's door. "How will we meet you again, madam?" one of the soldiers asked, enchanted by her beauty. "I told you, boys, tonight. Hope you can make it," she said, and then slowly pulled a sucker from her lips and gave them a wink. "We have to go, daughter," Carlos said, lightly growling the last part. Jumping in the truck, Sierra waved the sucker at the 2 men before placing it back in her mouth. The 2 soldiers slowly walked over to their companions, occasionally looking back in the hopes of getting just one more glimpse of Sierra as she began to drive away. "Dad? Dad?" Carlos asked as they were once again on their way. "Relax, they bought it." "Next exit, daughter," he said sarcastically as she let out a little snicker. "You know I am only 35, right?" Carlos said as they turned onto the exit to pick up Smith, Kate, and the rest of the team. Reluctantly dropping the topic, Carlos asked, "Where to now?" There was a hint of hurt in his voice. "Karnik said to drive to the end. It will stop at the river. After that we sit and wait. They will find us." Once at the end of the street, Sierra looped the truck around so that the back gate of the trailer was to the river. This put them facing in the proper direction for a quick exit. Once set, she reached down and retrieved a radio taken from the supply room at the armory. "White One, this is Goldilocks with back to the river." "Goldilocks?" Carlos asked. Couldn't have come up with a better call sign. "White One, copy." "Did it not work?" Sierra asked as she adjusted her hat and watched for any signs of trouble. Carlos did the same. Sierra could sense a change in Carlos's demeanor, even as the world outside continued in its usual pace. There was a tightness to his posture, a focused intensity in his eyes. She tried to discern what had gripped his attention among the sea of moving vehicles, but the passing cars and trucks offered no immediate clues. Nevertheless, she knew instinctively that something was amiss. Her gift of sensing emotions, an ability she'd had since childhood, had always served her well. She could pick up on the most subtle shifts in mood and often understood what people felt before they themselves fully comprehended it. Only one person had ever eluded her intuitive grasp, baffling her at every interaction: Karnik. He was the enigma in her otherwise predictable world. "There," Carlos blurted out. "That SUV has crossed at least 4 times now. They must be looking for White One." Years of law enforcement had trained Carlos to see patterns, and this was an easy one to track. At the same time, the two of them felt a shift in the truck and directed their eyes to the mirrors. They watched as figures passed from the shrubs to the back of the trailer, and moments later, they heard the gate of the trailer closing. Understanding just what had taken place, Sierra once again grabbed the mic on the radio. Goldilocks has the bear tucked away. Military radio etiquette wasn't something Sierra had learned, but for those at the other end, the message was still loud and clear.